Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 50, a pretty big milestone for this particular series of B-Road Ballers. And what better way to celebrate, if you will, a milestone, than to feature a really outstanding car. Now this isn't necessarily the best hot hatch you can get, that's not what I'm saying at all, but like a few other hot hatches in particular, this is a very notable and very useful model within the hot hatch category. And the car is of course the Renault Clio RS, the newer shape model that's featured on the game. The Clio used to be a relatively small car, now not so much. It is small, but not as small as it used to be. It kind of has that mini syndrome where it's got bigger over the years, but it's a well-respected car. It's a very popular car, and the high-performance versions are considered not only in the game but also in real life to be some of the best small hot hatches you can get. And overall, I have to say I have a huge amount of respect for Renault as hot hatch manufacturers. They really know what they're doing when it comes to hot hatches. Now this car in particular is not a huge love of mine. I personally prefer the Megane, and even then, not the newer model. I prefer the older shape Megane RS, my favourite version being the R26 F1 version. But this car is very strong within the hot hatch category. Now as far as spec, it's got a 2 litre engine, which isn't too surprising. It's front wheel drive as you'd expect, and it's a powerful motor. When fully tuned, you're putting out just under 500 horsepower and 325 foot-pounds of torque. So in such a relatively small hot hatch, that's quite a lot of bang for buck. And speaking of bang for buck, this is only a 36 grand car, which although doesn't make it the cheapest of hot hatches, it's certainly no way near the most expensive, and is a very good value car all round. 36 grand is not that much to spend, and you get a lot of power for that. As far as weight, it's unsurprisingly pretty good, 1,039 kilos. Not remarkably light for a hot hatch, but for a newer one, that's not bad at all. Many newer hot hatches do tend to be a little bit heavier due to the tech and the safety regs and all that kind of stuff that has to be considered nowadays more so than ever before. So overall, that weight is pretty reasonable. As far as horsepower per tonne, it's really good because the weight is low, the power is high. 476 horsepower per tonne is really outstanding for a hot hatch, and the maximum tuned PP is also very high, but unsurprisingly so given the rest of its spec. 543 PP is pretty hefty for a hot hatch. There are certainly others, some even higher than that, but that's pretty high, especially for a Renault Clio. So the question is, can it actually deliver on that really impressive spec? Because some cars really do and some cars really don't. Well, I'm glad to say it really does. This is one of the best all-round hot hatches in the game. Now I don't use the car all that much, but that's primarily because I'm just not a huge fan of it. The fact is though, this is a brilliant all-round hot hatch. And it's also, when tuned properly and in the right hands on the right track, a surprisingly difficult vehicle to beat, even if you're using vehicles beyond the hot hatch class. It's one of those cars which goes beyond the raw spec. The performance is better than its on-paper numbers would suggest. And on paper, it already looks good, so to say that it goes even beyond that is impressive, given that you're putting out nearly as much horsepower in this car fully tuned as an original shaped Lamborghini Gallardo. That's a pretty hefty little hot hatch. Now as far as straight line performance, the top speed isn't as quick as some others, but it can still do around 210, 215-ish under its own power, a little bit more with NOS and draft. The acceleration is pretty good, not so much off the line due to the front wheel drive, but mid-range and top end it's good. And of course, being a hot hatch, the most important thing really is the handling. Now, this car is a little bit more inclined to torque steer and understeer than some others. It's similar in that way to the RS250 Megane and the Focus ST because of how much more power those cars are running. They really are powerful for hot hatches, especially front-wheel drive ones. Typically, front-wheel drive hatches on Gran Turismo very rarely get over 400 horsepower if you really think about it. There aren't that many. Front-wheel drive hatches tend to be 350-ish, maybe a little more sometimes, very rarely over 400. These are almost 500. So that's a huge amount of power to be putting through those front wheels. Naturally then, it does have a tendency to shred those tyres. With the right tuning though, as I said earlier, it is a dominating force around the track, and this is one of a select few hot hatches on the game alongside the HPA Golf, the Golf R, to some degree the Scirocco R, the Focus ST, especially the Focus RS, and a couple of others which really are the best you can get in the hot hatch category. If you're looking for a strong car, this does exactly what you need from a hot hatch in every way. The handling is good, it's got tons of grip, it's relatively compact, it takes up a little bit less road space than something like a Ford Focus ST, especially in terms of length, and that can be advantageous on tighter tracks. But at the same time, due to the high-end power, the top speed is good enough for pretty much any track that you'd usually take a hot hatch on. It's only on the absolute top end of top speed tracks such as the Le Mans and obviously Route 7 or Route X that something like a HPA Golf will beat this car. But to be completely honest, as much as I love the HPA Golf, with all that car's power and the all-wheel drive advantage, it would still struggle to beat this car around, say, Sierra or the Nürburgring Ring because of how good this Clio is. Like I said, it's not necessarily the absolute best in the class, but it's very strong, and for 36 grand, you can't really go wrong with this car. So that's it overall for this particular episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.